Hello, everybody. I'm sorry for the late start. We had some technical issues. So I'm just going to give everybody a bit of time to log on here. I'm going to slowly start because I can see that the participants are increasing. My apologies again, everybody, for being late. We had a little technical issue, so I'm really sorry that you were stuck without the link. But you're here now, so let me welcome you. This is the first public webinar that we're having as part of the Blue Justice Conference 2020. So we're very happy to have you here. I hope that some of you joined the high-level event earlier and found it interesting. We're going to move now from what was primarily the political to the much more operational and technical level. Let me introduce myself briefly first. My name is Emma Bitboy, and I'm with the UNDP Blue Resilience team. I'm very happy to be moderating this webinar. We're going to be looking today, the panelists are going to be providing an insight into the findings of the first research phase of the Blue Resilience project. The topic of the webinar is what are key governance and gender challenges to tackling organized crime in the fisheries sector. And we're honored to have with us today on the panel two experts. We have first of all our lead governance researcher, Julia Kercher, who is the senior expert SDG researcher at UNDP's Oslo Governance Center. Welcome to Julia. And then we also have with us Medina Thiam, who is the Blue Resilience gender researcher, and she is Deputy Director of Maritime Safety and Marine Pollution Prevention at the Senegalese National Agency for Maritime Affairs. Welcome to you, Medina.
Thank you.
So just to briefly describe what they will talk to before they begin, the two of these experts will share the project's key findings on how governance and gender issues can act as bottlenecks to tackling fisheries crime. And a particular focus in the webinar will be on institutional cooperation, including looking at different cooperation models that the research has identified and their impediments and success factors. So, as we always like to do, we encourage participation. Please write your questions and your comments in the chat section. Julia will present first and then Medina, and thereafter they'll be very happy to engage in discussions or whatever questions you might like to ask. So that's enough for me. Over to Julia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma, and welcome everyone. We have a presentation prepared for you, which we will bring up now. And we will speak about three things today to share our research findings with you. You will see this here. First, we'll give you a quick overview of the project, very brief, and then we'll walk you through our research results, both on the governance and the gender side. And then we will just give you a brief outlook on what's next. So looking at the project, so next slide. There we go. The project provides the background, of course, to the research we did. It's the Blue Resilience project run by UNDP as part of the Blue Justice Initiative, and it was mentioned already this morning in the discussion among the excellencies. It runs hopefully from this year, actually, for the next 3 years. Its aim is to help implement the Copenhagen Declaration that we've already heard a lot about, that almost 30 countries have signed up now to tackle fisheries crime together. The focus of the Blue Resilience project particularly is to understand governance challenges in tackling fisheries crime, and with a particular focus, as Emma already mentioned, to look at interagency cooperation and collaboration. The project has three phases. The first one is the research one that we'll share with you on now. Then the next step is to develop a learning package based on that research and to roll that out. So quite straightforward, actually. Next, thank you. So today we look forward to sharing our research results from our first project phase with you. And we did research on the governance of tackling fisheries crime and also gender aspects. And I'll talk to the governance aspects. Next, please. the definition we're using in the project for fisheries crime, just to give you that as a background, is a broad one. It's mentioned in the Copenhagen Declaration, and it talks broadly about crimes within and associated with the fisheries sector that are frequently transnational and often committed by organized criminal networks. So it includes illegal fishing, the I in IUU, if that illegal fishing is a crime. But that the definitional issues were not the focus of this project or the research. What we did for the research on the governance side, we did a literature review. We conducted 21 interviews with 16 countries and 5 international global experts, and we consolidated and validated our preliminary findings. So that's how we got to what we're presenting to you today. The overall research question is, how can institutional cooperation help tackle fisheries crime? So that's our overall question. And to understand the context of that institutional cooperation, we looked into 3 aspects that you can see here: the concept, impediments to tackling fisheries crime, and specific coordination mechanisms. So I'll touch briefly on those 3. Next, please. We asked people in the interviews, our esteemed colleagues, that many of which I think are joining today, what the concept of fisheries crime is for them, what it means to them, what aspects, dimensions, phases it has. Many mentioned the value chain approach, so looking at the different phases of how fish is caught and processed for sale. But a lot of other people also mentioned something that we hadn't really come across so much before. And this is visualized here. We refer to it as fisheries crime as a risk or as a vulnerability in a society. And it came up in a lot of conversations we had. And people said, it's really important for us to highlight and find out and then highlight where fisheries crime is a risk in our country and where it leads to a vulnerability in the system. So it was interesting to see that in some cases, the fisheries crime is really an economic issue. It came out in the presentations this morning with the Prime Minister of Norway, for example. She was very much focusing on the economic aspect of it. Other countries said that fisheries crime has a strong security aspect to them because it increases and deepens, for example, criminal activity and security issues that are already present in the country. For other countries, fisheries crime is an environmental issue, first and foremost. And for others, food security or employment, or sometimes several, but usually one is predominant. So we found that very interesting because it links actually to one of the impediments that we also found. And that leads me right to that. Next, please. So the next thing we looked at was and the question we asked our interviewees was what are the key impediments, the strongest impediments to tackling fisheries crime? And the main ones are highlighted here, and I'll just speak to a few of them. The first one that connects very much with this conceptual point that I just made is that many colleagues said that they're struggling with a very low understanding of the concept of fisheries crime and its impact. So in many countries, colleagues are struggling to convince decision makers, but even the population, that fisheries crime is a problem in the country. So highlighting the dimension and the aspect that is most critical for the country and that is a risk and a vulnerability for the country when fisheries crime happens is very important to people. There are some other aspects. For example, people, of course, mention legal frameworks that sometimes are weak to address fisheries crime. They overlap or are outdated, but often it's also the implementation of legal frameworks. Another point that came out strongly was the tension between environment and security. When you talk about fisheries crime, you have two groups of professionals talking, right? Fisheries experts and usually law enforcement experts. And they come from different backgrounds, they speak different languages. So it's sometimes difficult for them to come together. And sometimes environmental experts, for example, are not so keen to look into the security aspects because they feel perhaps that's not, it doesn't do their issue well or so. So that's another issue. COVID-19, actually, the pandemic also came in because there are many aspects to this, but one was that one colleague mentioned was that a lot of their law enforcement was actually focused on checking vessels that are coming in with protective gear to see if people are coming onto shore infected. So there are gaps, there are holes of where other where criminals can exploit the system and come into the country undetected. Another one is, of course, institutional cooperation. Another impediment. The issue here is that fisheries crime touches upon and requires knowledge in a lot of different areas, not only fisheries, but tax authorities have important information. Of course, the police has important information. Employment records can be important. Many different agencies at the country level have critical information to tackle fisheries crime. So cooperation is essential. And as we said, that's the focus even of this project. And that leads me perfectly to the next and last point. Next, please. Cooperation between agencies at the country level to tackle fisheries crime. What are success factors? What works? First of all, we analyzed several examples of cooperation mechanisms around the globe. For example, in Indonesia and Solomon Islands, in Asia Pacific, in Trinidad and Tobago, in Guyana, in Latin America and the Caribbean. And there were actually many in African countries, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Tanzania, Senegal, South Africa. They all have mechanisms to facilitate the cooperation and collaboration between different agencies to tackle fisheries crime. Norway in Europe is also just updating its mechanism. So we analyzed them and we asked colleagues, what are success factors? What works well in these mechanisms? And what we found were all of these that you see here on the slide. And the interesting thing, now analyzing the information that colleagues so kindly shared with us, is that some of these issues, some of these success factors actually are fairly obvious, and they're discussed quite openly. There are things like resources, money is missing to put more patrol vessels on the water, basically. Institutionalization is important, making sure that mechanism can continue to exist. External support is important, so for example, donor funding, but it's also important on how it's used. Having a pre-approval system that makes sure that in an emergency situation or when things have to happen very quickly, colleagues can engage with each other without getting lengthy, going through lengthy approval systems is important, so pre-approvals. And also where a mechanism is located in the government and what its mandate is, so it's very clear. Those are key success factors, and they're quite openly discussed. The interesting thing is that there are also a number of issues that are, as we put it here, under the surface. There are aspects that are harder to address because they're perhaps more deeply rooted or linked to other bigger challenges that the country faces. Let's say historical or political aspects. So just to have a look at a few of those, high-level leadership and support was something that most of the colleagues we spoke to mentioned. Support from the political level to these mechanisms that allow for cooperation between agencies. It's critical, but it's very volatile because depending on how the mechanism is set up, it can quickly change when the political leadership changes, of course. Incentives. Why do people cooperate? In some cases, we heard that colleagues actually are not so keen on cooperating because it actually doesn't give them visibility. if you do something together, your name isn't necessarily on it, and you can't claim it in as your performance, for example, purely from a career perspective, from a professional perspective. But that's just one example. What are the incentives to work together, and what has to be there so people happily cooperate? Information sharing, it's similar. It seems obvious that information sharing is important, but you can also share information that is perhaps not just positive, and then the information you're sharing reveals that your quota to do this and that, or your success rate is lower than you expected. So it links to the incentives, like what are the downsides of information sharing. Information is of course always power in a way. And then transparency and accountability. Not everybody is interested in accountability, especially if they are perhaps partly involved or linked in some way to the activities happening. And trust was something that a lot of colleagues also mentioned. There is sometimes in some countries across the globe deep-rooted distrust between certain institutions. So how do you overcome that? It's not only around fisheries crime, but it's something that's much more deeply rooted. So in a way, looking at this iceberg altogether, we felt that in some cases, or in a hypothetical case, you could have a coordination and cooperation mechanism that has all the aspects above the waterline, has resources, it's institutionalized. But if the issues below the water are not addressed, then it won't work, at least not in the long term. So that's sort of our interim analysis of this. And I'll just wrap up here. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, we found that most experts find fisheries crime is underestimated, and they're struggling to get the attention of decision makers. We also learned that institutional cooperation is critical, but it can't be addressed in isolation. It's so linked to other issues. And fisheries crime is actually very complex and context specific. So you can't just take one example or one experience and just translate it into a different country. And as a result, some of the suggestions and the ideas we had moving forward to developing our learning package is that we probably need to look more at systems. So not just at mechanisms or institutions by themselves, but what is the context? What's their background? What do these institutions sit in? What's their system? Where do they sit? And we might need to use a process approach. So where we don't just say, these are best practices, why don't you do this? But we use questions that help people answer their own or reflect on their own situations and what's most suitable in their context when trying to improve coordination and cooperation to tackle fisheries crime. So those are the key takeaways that we have sort of noted down for ourselves at the end of this research phase. Thanks very much. I'll pass to Medina now, and at the end I will just wrap up.
Good afternoon. Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. So the part of this research is dedicated to the gender aspects of governance in combating fisheries crime. Maritime and fisheries violence affect all the global population. Fisheries criminality is mainly attributed to men. The coastal communities and politicians haven't yet succeeded in tackling fisheries crime. The maritime domain is male-dominated. Only 2% of women work in this area. So the research question is, where are the women in the fisheries crime law enforcement? Then the scope of this part of the research is related to the female participation in the fisheries law enforcement sphere. Next slide, please. Josephine, next slide, please.
Sorry, Medina, can you not see the next slide?
Yep. Yes, excellent.
Yes. Okay.
It's fantastic. The gender element in the fisheries sectors. I just want to say that the traditional role that we all know for the ladies working in the fisheries value chain, the entire fisheries value chains are well known everywhere. They are generally marketers, processors. They are rarely fishing vessel owners. For example, in Senegal, from a list of 200 fishing vessel owners, we have only 2 ladies. We all know from the FAO that half of the workers in the seafood industry are female. We have, in terms of representations and role, statistic not correct. The gender imbalance is mostly observed in that sector. What we can say in conclusion in that small part of women working in legal activities in the fishing sector is that they are working generally in low steps of the value chains. Sometimes they can just invest small amount of money in fishing in developing countries. Unfortunately, you have also other women standing in the fisheries crime arena. They participate in fisheries crime generally for socio-economic reasons. For example, for supporting their families in Zimbabwe, female women practice IU fishing locally in the maritime protected areas. Also, in South Africa, we know that there are some evidence of powerful women who run and finance illegal activities about abalone trade. In Nigeria also, in the Niger Delta, we know that we have indirect evidence of women paying for legal fisheries activities, but the fuel used for the fishers come from the vandalized pipeline in the Niger Delta. Also women, also from our research and from Africa and Latin America, show that women can pay for their family members to immigrate because they believe that they will find a better future than in their country. Next slide, please. Now, I would like to highlight the primary outcomes of that research. The gender inclusion in fisheries crime knows a lot of issues. What are the main challenges that women are facing to be part of this fisheries crime law enforcement governance? We have a lack of disaggregated data in gender fisheries crime law enforcement globally, regionally, and locally. I mean, the lack of information on their numbers, on the statistic. In the Navy, in the customs, in the fisheries crime, in the fisheries, administration, the maritime administration, the ports, the gendarmerie, the police, the MCS agencies, and also the justice. Women participating in the institutional sphere against the fisheries crime combat are underrepresented. We all know that less than 5% 10% are working in the Navy. For example, having been part of the Maritime Law Enforcement Dialogue 7 and 9 organized by the UNODC, we have only 8% of employees in the Vietnamese Coast Guard working as female, and only 2 women hold top positions. And only 5 female also are working in the Thai Marine Police. Why women are underrepresented in fisheries law enforcement, particularly in developing countries? In Africa, due to the sea blindness, less women are deployed out. They are just deployed in because they fit the administrative tasks and roles, and they work for the maritime administration or the fisheries administration and all the administration related to the law enforcement institutions. We have also a gender gap in terms of position, in terms of capacity building, and in terms of wages. We have noted from that research also physical stereotypes such as women are less capable in monitoring, controlling, and surveillance missions because of their strengths, their weak strengths, and their size. And therefore, those operational duties in fisheries law enforcement are dedicated to men. We have also cultural, traditional barriers, such as the role fundamental seen for women as ladies taking care of the family charges. The discrimination and also the sexual harassment are obstacles for women to enter in this fisheries crime law enforcement sphere. Next slide, please. Fortunately, we have some women who have reached high-level position in the fisheries law enforcement. Example, in Ghana, we have currently a lady running the Ministry of Fisheries. In Norway, the nice example is that in the fisheries ministries, in the department related to fisheries crime, 3 of the 4 experts working in that department are women. At the police also, the fisheries liaison is a woman. In Liberia, we have the Director General of the National Fisheries and Aquaculture, who is a woman. And from our questionnaire, and also I think from our expert meeting consultation, we have that answer that all heads in Trinidad, Tobago and Tobago are female in the fisheries law enforcement agencies. Next slide, please. Happy to show you Mrs. Kwe, the current fisheries minister of Ghana, and also the former minister of fisheries of Indonesia in Copenhagen in 2018 for the minister of Ghana, and in 2017 I was with the minister of Indonesia, and it is a pleasure to see leaders, female leaders that have achieved such great role and mission. Next slide, please. What could we do today better to have inclusive female participation in the fisheries crime law enforcement? We have the international engagement today from the UNDP with the 2030 agenda, transforming our world. And in the Sustainable Development Goal 5, aiming to achieve gender equality and empower women and girls. We need to have this SDG 5 implemented everywhere with the SDG 14, life below water, so we could have women enforced in the fisheries crime law enforcement sector. We need also to evaluate the fisheries institutional governance. As Julia mentioned previously, we need to know the challenges, the weaknesses, and opportunity of each country, then to assess the female presence in this environment to tackle the gender imbalance. Waiting for the full implementation of the SDGs, we know that this agenda recognizes that the inclusion of women in areas traditionally dominated by men will create more equitable, just and sustainable societies. We have the International Maritime Organization also, and UNODC, the UN Office Against Crime and Drug, particularly investing in the participation and integration of women in the maritime sectors. And we know that the CCP network from the UNODC invests in international governance and gender mainstreaming for global change. Extensively, hope is permitted in the fisheries law enforcement sector. Gender diversity may accelerate progress and performance in maritime domain, and particularly in developing countries. We need appropriate gender representation for reducing the lack of transparency in the fisheries crime law enforcement system. Next slide, please. Now, how to improve gender aspects of governance addressing fisheries crime? I think coming from a developing country, we need a strong political will. The strong political will just could invest for appropriate gender presence. It is noted also in the questionnaire that women are less prone to fisheries crime, for example, from Indonesia to corruption. So the national investment from the authorities can help to build gender strategies. And maybe from the UN, from the bilateral cooperation, we could have international and binding standards that could include women in the fisheries crime law enforcement. We need at the national level strategies, policies, and decrees coming from the high level to have assurance of maritime and fisheries crime law enforcement from both gender. We need positive discrimination to promote women. We need to increase and improve the female networking. Next slide, please. Networking, I think networking today is the key response to help women to be part of the fisheries crime law enforcement governance. This is two pictures from Vienna in September 2018 with a colleague from Kenya and another colleague, Nick, Jemima and Nick. for a seminar related to justice for fish, organized by Interpol and UNODC, and it was just an occasion to talk about networking, female networking. And yes, you can see Nick taking just a paper, and this paper, it has been mentioned, I for she. It means that men must support women and women must support women. The other pictures has been taken during the launch of the Les Femmes, the Law Enforcement Femmes Network, in October 2018 in Copenhagen at the Fish Crime Symposium in Denmark. Next slide, please. What is the way forward? We do not have data, statistics. They are very poor and often rare in developing countries. And I think globally, it is impossible to have data and even research, academic research on gender and on gender data and recognition of female work in the fisheries crime law enforcement on their responsibilities and on their missions. We need to have effective and strong research globally on gender. I have told earlier about the high-level commitment. Yes, in the developing countries, when you do not have presidential decree, presidential commitment, ministerial commitment, you won't see things evolving as you like. We need to have paper from those authorities, law from those authorities, a regulatory framework, imposing quotas to the institution addressing fisheries crime and imposing women a number, an amount, percentage of women in those institutions. We need to improve networking, mentorship at all levels. A global network for fisheries experts, for example, is needed. We need to promote today women for becoming fundamental leaders and champions of blue resilience. Merci de votre attention. Thank you for your attention. Now, the floor is yours, Emma.
Hello, thank you so much, Medina. Thank you, Julia. The floor, I think, is not quite mine yet. I think it is still going to be belonging to Julia, so I'm going to give it back to her. But I would say thank you in any case to both of you for your excellent input so far. Let me just revert back to Julia because she's going to tie everything a little bit together and give an indication of where we're going with the research findings. So let me just hand back to Julia first. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone, and Medina. Yes, what's next? After this research phase, first of all, we look forward to everyone's feedback on what we found. And whoever has not been able to access the presentation or join today, we will make that available. So do get in touch with us if you have any thoughts on what we found. We will then use this research at the beginning of next year to develop what we've so far called a learning package. It might be more of a learning process, but in any case, something that will help countries address fisheries crime better by improving their interinstitutional, interagency cooperation and collaboration. So that's the learning package. And as soon as that learning package is ready, we will roll it out with numerous countries that need it and that are interested. So those are basically the second and the third phase of the Blue Resilience project. Thank you very much. That's all from my side, and I'm handing over back to Emma. Thank you.